Hey everybody, this is going to be 2.2 New Lives in New England. We're going to start with the primary source that's going to be very important to how America views itself up through about now. And it's from a speech that John Winthrop gave, speaking of the Massachusetts Bay Colony that he was going to become governor of. And he said, "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world." We'll talk about that more in class. So, our objectives: we are going to explain why some Puritans left England, describe the Puritan colony in Massachusetts, and explain why Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire were founded. And we're also going to analyze the relationship between the New England colonies and American Indians as well. So let's start with why these colonies were founded. And it really has a lot to do with religion. So most of these New England colonists left England, well, partially to make money, but mainly because of religious differences. The group that founded Massachusetts, first at Plymouth Colony, were called Puritans. They were called this, it started out almost as an insult to them. They wanted to purify the Church of England. They thought that the Church of England, better known as the Anglicans, were still too Catholic, even after they broke apart from the Catholic Church. They still used a lot of the ornamentation and the language and the costumes from Catholicism, and they were like, they're still too close to Catholics. We're not a huge fan. And so they broke away from the Catholic Church. Puritans also wanted every congregation, every local church, to have more control over what happened in their local community. So the Anglican Church still had a Catholic-style setup with bishops. The bishops ran everything. There was an archbishop as well. And the leader of the Church of England was the King of England. So the Puritans said, we want more power at the local level. That's what we're interested in. And they didn't believe in bishops either. They said that, no, we should not have bishops or archbishops. We should have local power. Some Puritans even thought that the Church of England was past the point where it could be saved. These Puritans thought that instead of purifying the Church of England, they should break away from it. And these guys were called Separatists. They said we should leave the Anglican Church and form our own churches. These churches became known as congregational churches. Their beliefs made them very unpopular, especially because basically you're saying the British king is wrong and not ruling his church well, and this made them quite unpopular. So here is a copper engraving of the Puritan by Augustus St. Gaudens. You can see what they looked like with their tall hats and usually very dark clothes and very serious demeanor. The Puritans were followers of a guy named John Calvin, who was a Swiss theologian. He believed in what they called predestination, the idea that God had already chosen who would be saved and who would be going to hell. However, you still needed to live a pure and virtuous life in order to outwardly show that you were among the saved, or that you believed yourself among the saved. Puritans also sort of thought of themselves as the chosen people of God as well. They didn't do things like dance. They didn't wear loud, expensive clothing. They didn't do things that might offend God. They are mostly middle class and were very serious in their demeanor. They had a serious work ethic, not party people. They were also, like I said, pretty unpopular. They were calling for change in the Anglican Church. They were calling for change from the king and queen. So that's not something that's going to win you a lot of devotees. Puritan ministers were often dismissed or fired. And many Puritans left England for other countries like the Netherlands, where they would be more welcome and accepted. And eventually from the Netherlands, they left for the Americas. So, Puritans eventually arrived in North America. In 1620, the first Puritans left for America. These guys are called Pilgrims. A pilgrim is somebody who travels for religious experience. They landed in Massachusetts on a ship called the Mayflower, and they formed the colony of Plymouth. Interestingly, They were supposed to land in Virginia, but basically the winds blew them off course and they ended up landing in the north instead. Now, before they left the boat, almost 100 pilgrims signed what was known as the Mayflower Compact, a document where they promised to form a government and obey its laws. And this was most of the men on board this ship signed the Mayflower Compact. And so many historians look back at the compact as the beginning of Americans creating their own laws. So this is the signing of the Mayflower Compact. This was painted in 1899. You'll also notice that it's only men signing it. The woman is sort of off to the side. Now, in 1630, John Winthrop led a much larger group of Puritans to Massachusetts Bay Colony, slightly to the west. He called upon his followers to make the colony a city upon a hill where everyone could see it and it could be an example to the rest of the world. We'll take a look at this even more because many future politicians and people and pastors have called America, not just Massachusetts, but America, a city upon a hill, an example for other countries to follow. And Massachusetts Bay did things like they elected their own governors, which made them unique. Usually the king appointed a governor, but Massachusetts chose their own. So here is John Winthrop. We are going to hear more of his sermon later on. And this is both Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay colonies. Plymouth is down south, Massachusetts Bay is up north. Now, the colonists started to head out, and even some started to form their own colonies, like Connecticut and New Hampshire. And oftentimes, they were created by people who disagreed with the way that the church leaders were running Massachusetts. So that's one of the reasons why Connecticut was formed, and it was especially one of the reasons why Rhode Island was formed. So here are just some of the New England colonies. New Hampshire up north, Massachusetts, Plymouth, Rhode Island, and then Connecticut. Eventually, Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth will create one colony, just Massachusetts. Now, the Puritans who moved to America were looking for freedom to practice their own religion, but they were also saying that they only wanted to practice their religion in their colonies. They were not welcoming of other people. Catholics and Baptists and Quakers were not allowed in these colonies, except in Rhode Island, which we're going to look at in a second. In Massachusetts, they actually executed people of other faiths who tried to settle there. There were 3 Quakers who were hanged in Boston Commons for practicing their variation of Christianity. Others who were not killed were banished. So, for instance, there were some Massachusetts Puritans who disagreed with church elders. They were often forced out. And they had to make their own way. This included people like Roger Williams, who said that natives should be paid for their land. He also had other various beliefs that set him at odds with the rest of Puritan society. And also Anne Hutchinson, who said that women should have more of a voice in the Puritan community. And also that if you were a chosen person, you didn't have to obey laws and rules. So both these guys set out. Eventually, Roger Williams becomes the founder of Rhode Island. So, this whole idea of paying for Native American land was ridiculous to some in Massachusetts. So here is Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, who said, "God is too large to be housed under one roof." And here's Anne Hutchinson, who said, "The Lord judges not as man judges. Better to be cast out of the church than to deny Christ." She was cast out of the church. She was cast out and went to go live in Rhode Island and eventually in New York. Also, I love the fact she was cast out of Massachusetts, but this statue is from the Massachusetts State House. So, like I said, Roger Williams fled to Rhode Island. He founded the colony. He founded the city of Providence in 1636. And Rhode Island was a place where many religions were welcomed, including Baptists, Jews, and Quakers. Anne Hutchinson moved to Rhode Island after being put on trial and banished for saying that women should have the same rights as men in Massachusetts. Rhode Island was also the first colony to say that we should not have church and state be the same thing, that church rules should not be the rules of the land as well. This is something that's going to, of course, pop up when we make our own country. Now, New England colonies were of the firm belief that the devil was a real threat. You know, the devil was out there. In fact, he was walking among us. They blamed the devil and his minions, especially witches, for things like sickness, bad years of crops, animal deaths, anything that they couldn't explain. And on some occasions, that fear was so intense, it led to accusations of witchcraft and devil worship. The most famous or infamous was the Salem witch trials in 1692, where 19 men and women were hung after being accused of witchcraft, and one man was crushed to death under giant rocks. So here is a memorial to the victims of the trials in Salem. Now, let's look at the relationships with Native Americans as well. These Puritan colonists saw the wild lands of America as ungodly, and the people in them also were seen as ungodly. So they tried to make Massachusetts look like a New England, which I guess makes sense with this being called New England. They cleared out fields, they cut down trees, they replaced wild animals with domesticated animals. And so most Native Americans were feared and, disliked as much as the landscape. Both the landscape and the people were considered savage, though occasionally some New Englanders would make alliances with them in times of need. They were still not trusted and not well liked as well. So eventually these native tribes fought back against the British. So there was a time where the Pequot tribe went to war with the colonies due to the continued expansion of the British. This led to what is known as the Pequot Wars. And this led to both sides committing vast atrocities, probably the most famous of which was the English and their Native American allies surrounded a Pequot village and set it on fire. And as the Pequots tried to escape their burning village, the British shot them down as they left. Eventually, in 1638, the Pequots sued for peace, but by that time, most of their land and most of their people were gone. So whoever was left sort of had to flee or live under English rule. So here is the massacre at the Pequot village. After the Pequot War, the British did attempt to Christianize the native people a little bit. They tried to set up what were called praying towns, run by missionaries where they could convert the local tribes. The natives also had to convert to the English way of life, wear English clothing, speak English, take up farming, so on and so forth. Many natives rebelled and moved away from this forced conversion. This would not be the last of the Native American rebellions. The last of them, the last, well, not even the last one, but the last big one in New England was called King Philip's War. This was sort of the last-ditch effort of the Native American tribes in New England in 1675, trying to gain their independence or perhaps even kick the British out. The native tribes sort of banded together and fought under the leadership of a man named Metacom, a local chief. He was known by the British as King Philip, and so the whole thing became known as King Philip's War. And again, this was a brutal warfare, guerrilla warfare. Both sides committed atrocities during this time. And eventually Metacom was killed by another Native American working for the British, and most of the surviving Indians of his rebellion fled north into Canada. So here's Metacom, otherwise known as King Philip.